Well, hello there, and welcome to episode 15 of the podcast from UKCPD. Jump into success. Okay, let's get going. Alrighty, here we go. Episode 15 of our fantastic podcast. I say fantastic because, well, we've had lots of feedback and you think it's fantastic too. So there we go. And episode 15, I can hardly believe it. We're really racking these numbers up. And given that we started this as an experiment, I really do appreciate all of the really positive feedback that we have had. And once again, I will say, if there's a particular thing you'd like us to talk about, personal development wise on this podcast, be sure to get in touch and we'll see if we can get maybe a guest on, or just we'll cover it ourselves. Now then, a couple of things I just want to mention before we get into today's special guest. We've had lots and lots of really interesting comments and feedback and lots of likes for our outside broadcasts that we've been doing. And if you haven't seen any of these, it's me, Tony Nutley, out with a selfie stick and my phone recording videos answering questions about all things personal development. And if you haven't seen them, they're on all our social media channels. So on Instagram, it's at UKCPD, or my name at Tony Nutley, or YouTube, or even my own LinkedIn. You just find me on LinkedIn, Tony Nutley, and you'll find me. The videos are there, and also on YouTube and Facebook as well. So you might want to check those out. They're kind of interesting, different topics. They're very casual. I'm just walking along the coast here and just chatting about all things personal development. So you might enjoy those. Certainly you'll enjoy them, I think, if you enjoy this particular podcast. Now then, what have we got for you today? Well, we've just interviewed a very interesting individual, Mr. Paul Sherwood. Now, Paul has got such an interesting background. He's worked in lots and lots of different industries, and I think actually anybody who's interested in anything professional or indeed personal development will find this interview very insightful and interesting. Paul's got some very interesting experiences, one of them sailing the wrong way around the world. But I'll let you listen to the interview as he explains that. But it's certainly very interesting. We're really grateful that he gave up his time for this interview, because I really think there's some fantastic learnings for all of us in this interview. So without further ado, here's Paul Sherwood, and we'll put all his details in the show notes. Enjoy the interview. Okay, so really is great to introduce my special guest today, Mr. Paul Sherwood. And Paul comes from this notion of minds. What is it? Minds align. Have I got that right, Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. Minds align.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it stems from 15 years of me doing personal development, starting out my journey with you and UKCPD, and it's ultimately not only bringing our own mind together in this kind of disparate, crazy, squiggly world that we live in, but how do we bring a team's minds together collectively? Right. And all of the work I've done with organizations and senior leaders, a lot of it is about time and connection. So Minds Align was born out of my desire to go into the freelance world. How do we bring thinking and ideas and personalities and mindsets together to work collectively to create that true north?
Yeah, well, that sounds pretty good. Yeah, very good. And of course, in NLP, we talk about the sort of the field and the wisdom of the field and the group, trying to align that to logical levels or something like that. I kind of guess it's a similar thought process.
Yeah, absolutely. And of all the presuppositions that jumped out at me back in 2011, it was the map is not the territory was the one that completely blew my mind. Yeah. And I think that shines through in Minds Align, because it's helping teams realize that, how I see the color blue is different to how you see the color blue. And when we look at what is the closest possible definition of the reality that we're working towards, the objective, the target, the well-formed outcome, whatever we want to call it in the business world, the closer we can get to an agreement about what that looks like and how we deliver to it, the easier the journey is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, brilliant. Well, I kind of jumped ahead there. So Paul Sherwood, trainer extraordinaire, coach, all of these fabulous things that you've been doing. And I know you've got a really, really varied career from, corporate, your freelance work. We've already mentioned some of that. And I know you've worked for the MOD. Tell us a little bit about yourself, because I know some of our listeners will know you, college members, people who are on the personal, on the Be Inspired group, rather. But the podcast goes out to the universe. So who knows who's listening. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey, who you are, and how you've ended up where you are a little bit.
Okay, thanks, Tony. My name's Paul Sherwood. My journey into this field, in fact, we were talking about it the weekend. It's 28 years, almost to the day, that I set off on a round the world yacht race at the young age of 21. Wow. And part of that journey was being forced into this really close team dynamic. We sailed the wrong way around the world against the prevailing winds and currents, about 10 months, 30,000 miles. And the 14 crew, it was a real understanding of what really good teamwork looks like, great leadership, and a buzzword at the moment, psychological safety. And I became really interested in human communication, how we understand ourselves, how we work under pressure and high performance. And that has been a common golden thread throughout my career. And whether I've worked with special forces, working with all sorts of interesting stuff with the MOD, through to international baby swim schools and manufacturing, the one common theme has been people, how we connect to ourselves and other people to deliver an outcome for business, for a charity, for public sector, for the community. So that in a nutshell, that I really had this broad journey of experience, but that one common thread has been connecting with each other and ourselves.
Wow. So sailing the wrong way around the world, was that deliberate?
So it was called
a mistake. Somebody got the compass the wrong way around. Wait a minute.
So it was billed as the world's toughest yacht race, principally because most of particularly the bottom part of the voyage around the bottom of the world is against the prevailing winds and currents. So the professional sailors will go downwind at crazy high speeds. This is a bit more of a challenge where you're bish, bash, bosh across the bottom of the world. So wow. It was a concept that you can still sail around the world. You don't necessarily have to do it the way these super duper Formula One sailors do it. But what we did is at the end of it, we came away as being a really well honed crew that were communicating unconsciously, very intuitively, and really knew each other well.
Yeah. You often read that, teams that have sort of been in an intense, sort of confined, almost, I won't say claustrophobic, but if something goes wrong, it could be pretty nasty, that there is a certain unconscious language that develops between you. So what do you think was the sort of biggest learning for you from that experience? Because it sounds pretty exotic. Sailing around the world is one thing, on a boat like that.
It's a really interesting question. Firstly, the furthest you can get away from someone is 67 feet, at the front or the back of the boat, or as I would do, up the mast, 80 odd feet up the mast. We had a knockdown in the Southern Ocean, so a big wave broke us and knocked us flat in the water. Our radar strut went, so we had no immediate radar, so we were in amongst some of the icebergs. So there was a real wake-up call about how alone we were. We were too far away for air sea rescue, too far south for shipping to meet us. So we were wholly reliant on ourselves and those other yachts that were in the fleet with us. There was 13 other yachts sailing with us. And that realness, that, when the rubber meets the road, so to speak, is where all of your training, all of your unconscious skills really kick into the fore. So it was a case of make the boat well again, get the boat upright, do the repairs that were required. One of the team members broke his ribs. So there's a few injuries and bruises. But it was over the next 2 or 3 days, it was how do we get the boat to a state of seaworthiness so we can get on a race. It wasn't a case of let's go back to land. It's all been a bit horrible. It's how do we get back racing. And when I translate that to the business world, every organization, every team has those pitfalls, has those failings. It's the measure of success is how quickly you get back up again. And either you redefine where you're going or you decide what you need to do differently to get there.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned a presupposition before. I guess there's two there. You do have all the resources you need. When you really dig deep, you will find them because you have to. There's an iceberg, people. We need to look at that. And no failure, only feedback.
Lots of feedback. And I think
I can imagine.
one of the things I learned very quickly is, as you would expect, it's very easy to become short-fused. You're exhausted. One particular leg, we had about 3 weeks of continuous storms. We were all exhausted. And you're running on vapors, you have minimal sleep, you're on a freeze-dried diet. So there's that element of you have to get on well with people, because ultimately they could be the ones that at the end of your lifeline pulling you back over the side. So, no matter how short-fused you might become in yourself, it's recognizing actually there's still a job to do here. And you've got 13 other people that you're looking out for as well.
Yeah. Wow. Do you think going on that trip was kind of personality defining for yourself?
Completely. I was the youngest on the, you had to be 21 to do it. And I was a very naive young 21-year-old, just graduated from college. And I was sailing with people that had built businesses. They had grown-up children. For them, it was that opportunity, that once a lifetime trip for them. And there was a handful of us that were at the lower end of the age spectrum. So for me, it was, sitting on the rail, sailing with the sails set 3 days on end at a time, having conversations with people and really understanding, getting under their bonnet, what makes them tick, what are their passions, what are their drivers, and what are their values. And I think it was a time in my life where I probably was in the process of establishing my own. And it was just such a wonderful, immersive opportunity to learn and draw that experience and wisdom from 13 other people.
Wow, sounds extraordinary. It wouldn't be for me, because I would absolutely be petrified of, like you say, breaking down. I don't mind getting on the ferry to France. That's about as much as I'd like to do, I think. I was watching the news this morning, actually, and there's people on a 3-year round-the-world cruise, and the boat's been broken in Belfast for the last 4 months or something ridiculous. And I was thinking, how bonkers is that? I mean, I'm sure Belfast is lovely, but it seems like a weird place to break down before you go around the world. It seems a very odd thing to do. I think maybe I just prefer my home comforts. Although I suspect it's very nice on these swanky cruise ships. I don't know.
A few G&Ts, I think.
Yeah, I think you'd need quite a few to get me on the boat in the first place, quite frankly, but there you go. Okay, so that's really interesting. So a little bit more about your career, if you don't mind. So I mentioned there have been lots of different, the same in many ways, but disparate. So, MOD, corporate, freelance, and I think you've done some other sort of interesting type of organizations that you might consider like public service or fitting almost into a charitable sort of frame. Tell us a little bit about how you sort of step from one to the other, because I'm imagining that the organizational outcomes might be slightly different. The culture will definitely be different. And how are you going to navigate that, doing the things that you'll need to do? I know you said it's all about people, but even so, it sounds like quite a challenge to me.
Yeah, so my first career was in local government. So I worked in housing benefits offices, and my last role was managing a huge department in Bristol City Council. And arguably I was inexperienced, naive, early 30s, had a big old department, about 150, 160 staff, delivering to about 50,000 customers in Bristol. And the early part of that journey, moving into that role, we did some 360 feedback, and it came out of that process really quickly that I had some learning to do. I wasn't a great leader. I was frustrating members of my team. I had a leadership team of 7 and about 15 team leaders. And although other people in the authority thought I was good, I was a maverick, I was getting stuff done, actually the people that mattered, the people that needed my leadership, they weren't getting what they needed. So I was very, very fortunate that over a period of 3 to 4 months, I had some executive coaching, some really good, solid leadership development for me. And we did some good work with the team, and it enabled me to massively shift my approach in terms of my style, my communication, and what they were getting from me, recognizing that I needed to serve them as a leader, as opposed to perhaps what I'd stood into was they do as they're told, they follow my direction, and I have all the ideas and make all the decisions. So I was very fortunate in a very short period of time. I had that wake-up call. And again, no such thing as failure or any feedback. It was being able to respond to the feedback in a way that made a difference to them. I then took redundancy during welfare reform, and I took a year out. I did my UKCPD journey with NLP, got into holistic therapy as well. And then I jumped straight into a learning development role. And that period of time was an opportunity for me to reflect about what was it about a leadership role that I loved. it wasn't necessarily being the guy in the hot seat. It was about the opportunity to support and enable other people to grow. So my learning and development coaching and leadership development journey firmly began with the MOD at Porton Down, one of the most secret facilities in the UK. It was really interesting. It was
everywhere.
Absolutely. I had two respirators under my desk, depending on what I was dealing with. And it was that kind of come home from the day and couldn't really tell anyone about what I'd been up to for the day. But again, that honed for me, the understanding of the importance of connecting with people. There were elements of the job you couldn't talk to about the person, sat next to you. You couldn't talk about what you're working on. So how do you then connect with that person? How do you create common ground and common purpose so that when you are working together, there's trust, there's absolute confidence that you know what you're doing. And you can see it in the military. This is why the military works. There's that real sense of camaraderie, the brotherhood, the sisterhood, and looking out for each other. And for me, that was a real great foundation. Not only was I doing the NLP stuff, I was doing some mentoring with wounded, injured, and sick soldiers. So that really helped me understand what that was like, that kind of rehabilitation into civilian life in the forces. And I then started that journey, everything from the head of organizational development with an international baby swim school, working with a family business as they wanted to put mission, vision, values into everything they did, working in manufacturing, 3 fantastic years with the fire service, putting together a national leadership framework, working with some really amazing people. And that for me was the understanding that my golden thread, as Simon Sinek talks about, is there's no greater service than being in the service of those that are in service of others. And you have this real common purpose. And Dan Pink talks about the autonomy, mastery, and purpose as the 3 intrinsic motivators. When you have that common purpose in an organization or a team, and you understand how congruent that is with who you are, you fly. You're in flow. Things, no matter what challenges you face, you can see what you're contributing to and why you're putting the effort in.
A few years back, it was quite a few years back now, we did a little bit of work for some, I think they were ex-service people at that point, but I think they'd come back from one of these ghastly wars in some ghastly desert. But it was very humbling to spend time with them, doing a little bit of coaching and kind of very minimal in my model of the world. But I think for them, well, certainly the feedback they gave, that it was very valuable to them. But it was very grounding, very humbling that, I might worry about the weather if I've got to do, go out and do the shopping or something. And these guys, are on the front line defending, the interests of the nation. It's pretty, there's a whole realignment of, right, okay, I should stop grumbling and be a bit more grateful for the life that I've got.
Absolutely. And that really resonates with me. I remember some days managing some of the training programs. We were doing pre-deployment training for troops that were then going to apply the training out in Afghanistan. And my biggest concern was the schedule for the day and would the sandwiches arrive on time. And then you kind of realize that actually, no matter what our views are on war and defense and so on, these people are making huge sacrifices and commitments for all of us, for our freedoms and for our safety. And the relative stresses that I had in that role relative to what they were having to learn and retain and then going to apply out in the theatre of war was phenomenal.
Yeah. And you're right. It's kind of separate from how we might feel about war, because I think most of us think war's probably not a great idea. However, there will come a time when somebody has to step up. And, there was all that debate during the election about conscription. I think Rishi Sunak wanted to bring back conscription, and I was quite torn by it. I remember thinking, on one hand, actually, it's quite a good idea. A lot of young people wandering around the streets could do with some discipline and self-reliance and a sense of teamwork. But on the other hand, are we training a whole bunch of people to be killers? I don't know. I was kind of torn between it. I think I settled on it would be a good idea, but not necessarily. I think there'd be conscientious objectors who don't want to join the military, but they could do, I don't know, work in the NHS or something. I don't know. But I do think there is something in that when you contribute to the greater good. There's probably some amazing satisfaction that comes back karma-wise. I mean, I don't want to get all woo-woo, but I'm a great believer in, you reap what you sow. Long-term and short-term.
I think we talk about whether it's altruistic or whether it's egotistical, irrespective of that warm, fluffy feeling we get when we are part of the tribe.
Yeah.
And that tribe is together, it's supportive. Again, that psychological safety word comes up. That, you know, the absolute foundation of well-being is, do I feel supported? Do I feel trusted? Have I got all the resources I need around me? And have I got the people around me to you know, to step up when I need them to? Am I in a position to step up when they need me? And no matter where you're going in that team, whether it's in the sports or you know, the sports arena or the boardroom, that collective accountability and that trust is absolutely fundamental.
Yeah. Brilliant stuff. So you're in the human potential movement, or industry, if you want to call it, as we used to call human potential. I think we just call it organizational development or people development now. I don't know. It keeps changing. And you mentioned leadership. If I was to press you, and I know some of the listeners like this kind of stuff, what sort of leadership model would you think is the most effective, if you could pick one? I mean, I know it's difficult because it's often context dependent, but given you've been such a broad, which is why I was keen to have you on, actually, because it's such a broad sort of cross section of industries and sort of key areas that you've worked in. I'm kind of interested in what you would come up with that kind of answer.
Great question. It's like, do I know all my models? Do I know all my models? One thing I learned in the fire service, as part of the process of developing a national leadership model for all 50 fire and rescue services, is there was an assumption when people are in a leadership role that they're either this or they are this. So to take the context of emergency services, if I'm on the incident ground, I'm a transactional leader. I do this, get the job done. But when I'm back in the tea room with the crew and we're having a debrief, I'm a transformational leader.
Yeah.
And the assumption is that you're either this or you're this. And one thing I've learned over the years, particularly from a behavioral flexibility point of view, you know, one of the foundations of NLP, is it's context dependent, it's situational. And the model that I continuously come back to in all the work that I do is Dilt's logical levels every time. And when I take it, whether I'm doing one-to-one coaching or whether I'm looking at leadership frameworks for organizations, you see the penny drop in people when they realize that they've been acting out the bottom half of the Dilt's model for so long. You know, where I do stuff, what skills I've got, and that's that kind of work is where I do it. Yeah. And as you start to climb up the logical levels, you start to realize, actually, it's who I am when I'm doing that, who I believe myself to be. What values do I have that align with the organizations and the team around me? And what's our overarching purpose? And this cliched line that always comes up when I do facilitational coaching is the reminder that we are human beings. We are not human doings.
Yeah. And
so much of what organizations do is they measure performance, output, productivity, profit and loss on the doing, and fail or neglect to look at measures for the being. And what's wonderful is we're now, you know, with the wellbeing movement, positive psychology, we're starting to see key performance indicators for organizations that purely relate to the being. So, you know, the HR director can take data to say, actually, having a wellbeing program does affect our bottom line. It makes a difference. As opposed to
people turn up every day and they're not sick all the time and they're not moaning all the time because they think, well, actually, being part of this is actually quite nice and not just, you know, grinding away, slaving away at the desk. But I think sometimes I'm kind of almost gasping when I read things in journals, how that's changed so much because, you know, you and I probably been talking about this and others for generations. I mean, I've been involved in this industry for so long. But it's finally begun to sunk in, especially to corporate world. Actually, if you look after people, and of course, a bit of that was COVID, and people began to make changes about what they wanted was important to them in their life. A lot of people quit their jobs or downsize and do part-time. I think people thought, wait a minute, we need to look after our, because they're the asset in the business, the people. Without them, you ain't going to have a business.
And I certainly learned that the hard way in the manufacturing environment, where, you know, it's not uncommon in manufacturing where people are measured or viewed upon like widgets and processes.
Yeah.
And you start to look at lean manufacturing and systems thinking and Lean Six Sigma that you see in manufacturing processes. When you start to populate that process with people, you take the heart out of it straight away. And the ability to reconnect with the most important part of that process is really, really important, fundamental to longevity and well-being, things like staff retention. And I think this is one of the dangers of AI, is what we're seeing is how can we dehumanize as much as possible, when actually COVID has taught us that time and connection is fundamental to well-being, to mental health, to this explosion of isolation and loneliness that we're seeing in society. So I think we're at this really exciting time where we can go down that track of perpetuating all of the problems that we know to be true with technology that will accelerate it, or to reconnect and say, actually, hybrid working, bringing people back into the workplace, there's a real value in doing that. Yes, there are some challenges and some obstacles around sustainability, but actually to truly connect with each other, can we do it over a camera? Really, I'm curious.
Yeah, it's got its limitations. I mean, I'm very, very, very acutely aware of it. We were always an in-person training organization. We had a training center in Swindon, in Wiltshire. And then COVID turned the world upside down. We didn't go back to the office for a whole variety of reasons. A lot of it was people didn't want to have to come to Swindon. I don't know why. Swindon's very nice. But it's cost, cost hotels and all of that kind of stuff if you're traveling. But you do miss. I mean, I always say to students who are sort of ringing up saying, "Well, I'd like to do the training. I'd like to do a training." It's as near as damn it as we can get it, but it isn't the same. It isn't the same.
Absolutely. I think in the learning and development, with my learning and development hat on, I think the ability to connect with more people over a geographic distance remotely is fantastic.
It is,
and the ability to record it, and if you're not on form during the session, you can then take that recording as a learner and you can digest it. So I think there's massive benefits.
There are advantages, and the recording is one of the big advantages that people appreciate.
Absolutely. I think the challenge is from a leadership point of view, where you're doing one-to-ones. And you're dealing with thorny issues and challenges, and trying to support someone's performance, or someone might have a mental health issue. So I think it's that using that technology and that virtual world and accelerating that, but recognizing that there's a real time and space for person to person connection.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. So a couple of other questions for you then. We've done leadership. So favorite coaching model, if you were to have one?
Grow. It works. Yeah.
Okay.
I love PZO. I think I'm a big fan of simple. And you see all of these, I remember doing a process with you and PZO. I think the Grow model is really simple. What I've loved about it is when I've gone into organizations and we've looked at developing a coaching culture, I get I'm a NLP master practitioner, I'm a qualified NLP trainer, we've got this process over here and I know it works, and you try and shoehorn it in, and recognizing that for some people this is the first steps they're taking in the coaching world.
I get that. Absolutely.
How do I work with leaders, line managers, where they can remember something that's simple, they can take it into a one-to-one conversation, and they can make a difference? And the best way to do that is keep it simple, and then it propagates. Then you nurture that coaching mindset with the view that potentially, if you're trying to launch a more complicated model into an organization, you might hit 30-40% of the line managers in that business, but 60% of them, I ain't got time for this. I'm dealing with that KPI or that objective, or I've got that process, or I've got that member of staff that's been off sick. So it kind of loses the impact. What I have noticed, and this is something that was certainly the case of the fire service, is going with the basic models and those people that take a shine to it really quickly, then you load up the complexity and you give them a more diverse toolkit, and then you let them work their magic across the organization.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'm in total agreement with you. The good thing about Grow is everybody knows it more or less, or they've heard of it at least, and they can pick it up very, very quickly. GROW, just about anybody can get that. And even though I'm famous for complaining about the Grow model being omnipresent in the industry, and sometimes you think, oh my God, save me from it. It's a great place to start, and you can build on it and add in all sorts of things, especially the beginning part. You can turn G into a PZO in a sense, and I know you can do lots of interesting things. Great. All right. Next question. Are you ready? This is the one. Favorite personal development book?
I've got several that you might have noticed behind me. So I'm a massive fan of Dr. Brené Brown. Simon Sinek blew my mind with some of his TED Talks. But I think Brené Brown has really opened up the permission to be vulnerable with personal development. And what I learned through her, not only her writings, but the stuff she's done online and some of her TED Talks, is this recognition that we come into this world with all of the skills and innate capabilities that we need for life to be successful. And enter a society and an education system that de-learns us, if that's a word, de-learns us. I remember with you that, with you and Chris at college, learning, actually, the first part of learning is unlearning. And I think that's what Dr. Brené Brown does very well, is accepting that actually to go on this journey, we've got to peel the onion, and we've got to get rid of the layers of complexity and messiness and ambiguity that weigh us down. And once we become vulnerable with, actually, this might be a completely new experience for me, or this might bring to an awareness that I've been doing it not so great for quite some time, then you can get into the really exciting learning space, as opposed to, the journey that I've been on, I've seen other people do it, is I want to know more, I want to learn more, I want to learn more. And that just layers on top of, unhelpful behaviors, unhelpful concepts and ideas. So I would say Dr. Brené Brown, Simon Sinek, a huge fan. David Marquet, the intent-based leadership stuff, very much using that in organizations at the moment. Whilst it comes from a nuclear submarine, the principles, the concepts are really sound and they're really applicable. More importantly, everyone gets it.
Yeah. Intent.
Yes.
And in fact, I think I did a video about this the other week, well, another month now, when the rugby was on the World Cup rugby thing, and they were interviewing, I've forgotten his name now, the famous guy who used to kick over the thing.
Johnny Wilkinson.
Him. And he was talking about, how do you do it? Concentration in your mind. And he was saying, intentional outcome is to succeed. And I thought, intentional outcome. And I pondered on just that phrase for days. And I think I even wrote an article for Think Big, because I'm thinking, that's it. What's my intention here with this goal or this outcome? It's kind of like goes the goal beyond the goal, because if I do that, I'll be able to do that. And then that will lead us to be able to do. And so there's a long term. And, if we just had the election here, and the short termism in politics, and that happens in the industry too, in organizations, we need to get to the end of the month. Yeah, but we need to think beyond that and think, a little bit longer, because otherwise we aren't going to be here the month after. And so that intent is so. I think it's like a magic word once you understand it. What's our intent here? What's the intention?
It's interesting you bring up Johnny Wilkinson. So that rugby team, that squad, a chap called Humphrey Walters was hired. He sailed around the world with me, and he owns a development company, and they worked with Sir Clive Woodward, and that's exactly what they did. So they looked at the inner game. They looked at the concept of behavioral psychology. Mental rehearsal, the whole teacup that you saw them doing on the pitch, that wasn't time out. That meant think clearly under pressure. So when you saw the team doing that, it meant take your time.
Think clearly under pressure.
Teacup, yeah. So if you watch the replays, you'll see the team doing this, and that was a visual cue for each of them to say, take your time, think about your inner game, think about what our intention, our outcome is as a team, think about where we're going. It's beyond this game. It's the cup, it's beyond the cup. So there's that real sense of, a cog in a big machine. Actually, how are you playing your part? How are you being in the moment, being present and contributing to the entire team's outcome?
Yeah, great. We've kind of come back to where we started with teamwork, which is interesting. Yeah, great. Okay, well, so this is the last question. You'll be pleased to know. And it's kind of a question I ask pretty much everybody. Given the life experience that you've had, and you're a qualified coach and practitioner. And I know you wouldn't give advice, but if somebody pressed you to give advice, if I want to bring more happiness and joy to my life, what should I do? If that was the question you were asked.
Interestingly, you mentioned it this morning in your blog, your walk. So neuroscience is now catching up with what the ancient mystics have been telling us for millennia. And there are some basic things about structure, consistency. For me, it's get outdoors every day, see sunlight. I'm a massive wild swimmer fan, so I like to immerse myself in cold water every day. And journaling. One of the key consistent components of my leadership, of my personal and professional development, and more importantly, my mental health has been journaling. No matter what I'm learning, what I'm doing, where I am in my life, I recognize that when I don't journal, there is a greater struggle. There is a greater frustration. The stress levels start to mount. So of all of the habits, I would say is the element of get up early and get out. I know for some people that's not actually possible with family commitments and so on. But the next best thing for me is journaling, is get stuff out of here. Because can be a real minefield. The opportunity to take that volatility, absolutely. And in a world where it's just information everywhere, I'm going to take some time for myself to connect with me, and I'm going to write some stuff down. And that stuff can be bonkers stuff, but just the process of doing it is the catharsis itself.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it was Jim Rohn who introduced me to the idea of journaling. And I remember at the time, listening to him talk about it, thinking, what, you mean a diary? It just seemed ridiculous to me. I went, no, not a diary, Tony. Your thoughts, not your schedule. And once I started doing it, I'm an intermittent journaler. I do it religiously for a while, and then I kind of stop, and then I come back to it again. I suppose a bit what you said, I noticed that I'm not doing it, and I'm beginning to feel the effects of not doing it. And so I go back to it. So it is very, very interesting how restorative it can be. It really, really is interesting. Brilliant. Paul, this has been brilliant. We really, really appreciate you giving up your time and your wisdom to share with our listeners. And I'm sure we'll get lots of positive feedback. Any lasting comments before we let you go?
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and a massive personal thank you for everything you and your team at the college have done in the professional and personal development world.
I really appreciate that. We're giving it our best shot, and that's kind of onwards. Well, actually, this podcast came out of that. What else could we do? And someone had suggested a podcast, and so I've been amazed at how many people have really appreciated it. Starting small and it's growing quite interesting in ways I wouldn't have thought, to be perfectly honest with you. But there we go. Alrighty, we'll wrap up there. Thanks very much, Paul. Big shout out to Paul Sherwood. If you want to get in touch with him, we'll put his contact details in the show notes. Guys, take care of yourselves. See you next time. Okay, so there you have it. And listening back to that again, I just thought it was brilliant. Some really, really insightful stuff there. And we really appreciate Paul's time in sharing his wisdom and indeed his experience with us on the podcast. So if you enjoyed this, be sure to subscribe, because we got lots more coming up in the coming weeks and months. And I think I've mentioned before, if you're interested in personal development, be sure to join the Be Inspired group. Just jump onto our website, UKCPD.co.uk, click on Be Inspired group. You can join for free, and you get lots and lots of personal development content in your inbox. Guys, have a great week. Speak to you again soon. Bye for now.